Good morning. Um, so, thank you, Avi. Thank you for the introduction. I want to talk about one of the most important designers of 20th century, Herb LeBaron, and he, to me, is the epitome of the word pioneer. I think there's a lot of things that he helped change, but probably the most important thing I want to stress today is how history and our relationship to history shapes our understanding of things. In some ways, filters things out. So what I'd like to do today is sort of readjust the filters and help us understand some of these individuals a little bit better. The talk tomorrow will be a different topic, but everything is very much related about my experience as a designer. I'm a graphic designer by training. That's my perspective, has always been that perspective. So I see design and design history as a graphic designer. So I'd like to make my discoveries, my understanding of design history as relevant as possible. We have usually, we become a little bit too distant to things. So I'd like to, again, readjust the filters. And Herb LeBaron, such a big individual. He's in most design history textbooks or design books, compendium, but they become very abstract. You know, when we study things, when we come across things, if it's not your colleagues, if it's not people you know personally, they become very abstract. There's sort of this idea in the clouds. You know, LeBaron, Paul Rand. Who is it? What is it? You just see the work. What I'd like to do today is make the person of Herb LeBaron as real as possible. When we get to understand the individuals, we can understand their work much more. Once we understand the work much more, we can become better designers for it. It's this focusing of this abstraction into a real person with feelings, emotions, and choices. So I'd like to go through that with you guys. So if I hear the word pioneer, I always think of this. I was born in Soviet Union. I was a pioneer, part of the young communists. So that's my first initial, but we're going to talk about something else entirely. So Herb LeBaron began his career in the very end of 1930s and created his best work, or the work that he's best remembered for starting in the mid-1950s, so very mid-century designer. So for context, it took him about 18 years until the work he's known for begins. So so he's almost 40 when he starts making the work that we remember, and everything very famous comes after that. So this is sort of that kind of the bigger context. Our relationship to design history these days, visual research, is on the internet, so Google Images. If you type in Herb LeBaron, you get this in the Google image search. And that becomes our entry point. This is what we know. This is how we start to understand things. It's very much image, which graphic design is image. But we're looking at pixels, we're looking at a mishmash of things. Fortunately, most of this is his work. There's a few pieces that are not his. How do you filter? There is nothing very much clear. But again, we get these images. And to me, Herb LeBaron is one of the more stereotyped designers. A lot of designers become known for what they're famous for. We all do a lot of things, and then some things get forgotten, some things stay. So to me, LeBaron is remembered for two things. This style of expressive lettering, which most of it he didn't do himself, or none of it. It's work that he envisioned, specified, requested, but didn't actually draw. LeBaron didn't draw any of this at all, by hand. He had the ideas, the vision, what he wanted. His staff, amazingly skilled to be able to do this. This is a very difficult thing. If some of you have done lettering, you'll know that this is a very hard thing to do. So he's remembered for this. He didn't actually draw it. And it's become very popular. You know, the style of lettering, and then has become revived, and that's another reason why that work is now remembered. The second thing he's best known for is Devon Guard, the typeface that was created for the magazine, the logo and then the magazine. Again, very influential contemporary design work for the last, over the last 10 years. Lots of things have been using that style, that sort of ligature construction. So those are the two things. Again, LeBaron didn't draw avant-garde typeface. He art directed the typeface. He had a huge part in making it, but the drafting, the drawing is Tom Carnesi. Most of the lettering on the previous slide was also Tom Carnesi. He had 3 lettering artists, John Pastilli, Tom Carnesi, and Tony Despigna. All 3 Italian ancestry. But they did most of the work. The avant-garde lettering was mostly Tom. LeBaron, again, idea, art direction, feedback. But so the 2 main things we know LeBaron for are really a collaborative process. And we don't know. If you do a Google image search, you see these things. It's like, oh, Herb LeBaron, he drew this. It's much more complicated. So, and the problems, so this is one of the, strangely one of the top links that come up in when you do just Google search, not Google Images, for biographies of LeBaron. I don't know who put this together. It's typography3.com. So it's a selection of LeBaron's work. The image on the right, bottom right, is not LeBaron's. It's a student piece that's just scraped off the internet and plugged in. And it's a lot of things like this. So let's readjust the filters. Let's move away from that, and let's focus on what he really did and why he's a pioneer of graphic design. This is his beginning of his career. This is not his work. This is the context that he's entering into. He's working for a studio that is mostly involved with design for advertising. That's 1940s. It's mostly the main driving force in American design, advertising, and that's some of the more creative fields. Some of the more creative studios are doing work for advertising. Most advertising exists with, it's still, I think, partially true. If you're trying to sell a product for the advertiser, you're trying to figure out how to position the product. And the positioning happens with a message, right? Messaging becomes very important for advertising. It's the visual component is a smaller % of the intent of the ad. So messaging is first. Messaging means copywriting. Right? So copywriting is done first, or at this time. The copywriters write the text, the Garden Party beer, amazing headline, right? Like it's going to sell a lot of this beer. Once that's done, that goes to the art directors down the hall. So copywriters, art directors. So it's the art department. The term art direction comes from this period because it's a very specific thing. Now we still have art directors. They sort of do the same things, but the construction is very different. They actually put the graphics together. So the text is set, they have to typeset it, they have to find illustrators, photographers, and actually make the physical form of the ad to send out to the printer. That's mostly what they're doing. So if your text is decided as an art director, you're just mechanically making things. So not much idea. So it becomes very boring very quickly. It's a little harder to see, but this is what LeBaron did in the same time. So this is a pharmaceutical ad from late 40s. And 1955, this is Herb LeBaron's work. You have to sort of, I don't know, I can't see it fully from here, but there's a red type. Actually, maybe one slide, you could see it better. This is same campaign. The contrast is a little different. So this is his solution to the existing problem of boring advertising. When the messaging is so not interesting, the visuals are not necessarily going to help. And so LeBaron, as a pioneer, this is a very profound idea. It's not so much about the graphic design, the actual specifics of graphic design decisions, which typeface, what size, but the core idea here that's very, very different from the others is that here the typography is the concept. So this is superficial. That typeface could be any typeface. This typeface could be anything. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't carry meaning. In his, all of a sudden, the fact that there's a shift in typography, in the typefaces, is what creates the context of how we experience this ad. And because what he's doing is creating two passes at the copy. You read the larger text, and that forms the headline, and you read the large text with the small text that creates a second reading, right? We've experienced this as a graphic design concept a lot. But in 1955, this is new. No one in advertising is doing this. No one's thinking this way because the copy room down the hall, they figure it out. They give it to the art directors. They're not talking to each other. They're working kind of after the other. This is an idea that is created by a conversation between an art director and a copywriter. It's a sketch. I want these big words here and here and here. Let's help me write this. So it goes where I want it to go. It's not here, it's done, design it. This is a new paradigm. This is a new way of thinking that's completely revolutionary because it foregrounds the message, right? The thing that gets lost in all those old ads is the fact that they're just bogged down by these very bad visuals, potentially. And the whole point of advertising is to get the message across. This is way more effective. You know, and it takes a profound shift of thinking to make this possible. And this is why LeBaron is a sort of understated pioneer of this kind of thing. He's not, you know, he doesn't invent this, but there's a zeitgeist in a way of this kind of thinking, and he's the most dedicated to thinking about typography. It's language, and it's the thing that gives form to language, and that's why it's so essential. All he's doing is just like focusing on the very essentials. So this builds a little campaign, same client, and you see this in the material, like it stands out. You start to know the client visually. It's the building of a brand. You know, it's like, oh, no image. It's Merrill is the company. The doctors who are seeing these ads become accustomed. It's this clever thing. And the other really, really impressive thing is that he's giving you the message, the core messaging of this product, this pitch twice. Right? So it plays up the human nature. We're very curious, so we'll read the headline, but we want to see how it sounds when I read it together with the other stuff. It's just human curiosity. He understands that people are curious, and he knows how to play language to get people curious. So he gets people to read the text twice, and that's what advertisers want, right? Not one. So it's a very impressive. So not LeBaron, 1952, but this is his same client, same drug. The really amazing thing about this is, again, like it's this shift of perspective that I want to give. It's a beautiful ad, you know, it's a little dated, it's from 1958 or so. Beautifully constructed, but the really profound idea to me, helping understand the evolutions of history, is that we always kind of take things as they are. We see it in a textbook, you know, especially historical. You see this, and you're like, nice. How does this even come out? Like, what does it take for a graphic designer to come up with this idea? Not just, you know, today. You know, it's like, okay, you have a great idea, brilliant. But if this doesn't exist, this way of thinking in graphic design, how does someone come up with that? Do they just wake up one day and, wow, type and image can live and be the same? Think like, this is not a way of making that exists before this point. This idea of I'm going to take an image and text and make them the same. You know, it's insane to sort of just wake up one day and be able to do this. So what's important to me is not this, not the graphics, but the motivation. How do you even get there? So I've spent some time kind of thinking about the, just distancing myself from it. I think this is sort of at the core of really good typography, is what LeBaron understood very intuitively. In order to do this, you have to focus on not just the language, but you have to unfocus and look at the shapes of letters, because they're just form. So it's not a word, it's a shape with a shape with a shape with a shape. And if you see it as a shape, the S as a curve, then you can make these juxtapositions. And that's what I think was essential about LeBaron, is this like understanding at the core of typography, which is language, or form, and this beautiful appreciation for form. So if you look at his work, his work is all about pleasure of forms, of letters. It's this very big love letter to letter forms. And so he's able to do this, and he's able to establish this, like, it's language and it's not language. Language. So we as graphic designers have been trained this way. We do it unconsciously almost, but we do it all the time. We focus, like read the language, figure out what its meaning is, and then unfocus and we move it around. Like put it here, put it here, put it here. We're doing this constantly, but this is a conscious choice, and we're able to do this because stuff like this happened first in 1950s to really open the door for us. But this is, again, profound. The graphic design of this, to me, is less important. The way it's put together, which typeface he used, which image, like this is nice, but more importantly is the thing that led him to do that, because then it becomes much more easy to understand. There's another one, a very famous piece that an advertisement for the studio that he's working for, and it's a very interesting piece. I always used to focus on the forms. Nice, beautiful construction, very nice. But it's much more than that. So it took me a little bit of time, because I was searching for why does this matter to me as a graphic designer? If I don't design this way, what's the big deal? Okay, it's legendary. How is it going to impact me? Legendary design, maybe could be more pressure. Like I don't want to be as good as this. I don't like it feels weight. But I think we need to start looking at graphic design, and especially this design, in a slightly different way, and ask the right questions. So what I was asking myself when I was looking at these is, like, what else is here? How is this important to me? What I started understanding is that the LeBaron is doing something very, very important. Again, that's more important than the actual graphic design of this. He's controlling of the experience of reading. It's not enough just to have a really good headline and just type it and then, look, I'm really brilliant. I wrote this amazing headline. What he's trying to do here is he's making you read his headline the way he wants you to read it. So he's in full control. We all designers, we crave control. We want control. This is his exercising of the control. He's making it slightly difficult to read. So he wants you to actually not read it correctly the first time. He makes you read it, you scan. The letters are really large. It's a big, it's a full page ad. And it makes it hard to really quickly get the text. So you read it very quickly and you don't read it correctly. And you catch yourself, wait, I don't understand. And then you slow down and you carefully, almost syllable by syllable, read it. It's, it's very simple, but the language is funny, humorous, and similar, so it catches you off guard. So he's controlling through typography the engagement with the audience. This is 1958, 59, something like that. It's a really big, important aspect. The lettering by John Pistilli, so this is not a typeface, this is hand lettered, because he wants it to be flush, fully flush. You can't really do that with the typeface. Those two words don't fit together. You have, in the word type, you have one narrow letter, the T, and then in the word talk, you have T and L, narrow. So 2 narrow, 2 wide, 1 narrow, 3 wide. They will never stack perfectly. So you have to draw this. And the P, LP, here, it's exactly lined up. He's creating a pattern, visual pattern, which breaks the language. Just gives you that like shape. Oh, letters. So it has this tension, and that's what he's going for. But it's all for control. I want you to read it the way I want you to read it. So yes, it's nice, but it's much, much more than that, and that's what you can take away from it. Has anyone seen this piece, Beards? It's a very famous piece. It's image number 6 in the Google image search. So highly ranked. Is this LeBaron? It's not LeBaron. It's his staff. It's his business partner. Alan Pekelek designed this completely from start to finish. Try to find that information from Google. It's there if you know where to look, but it's not, if you type Herb LeBaron, you get these, you assume that this is his. So what we know is very thin. And it doesn't help that there's confusing things like this. So the things that I think LeBaron should be better known for are these. So by 1959, LeBaron becomes a partner in the company that he's working for. So learn Hennessy, SNH. And it becomes SH&L. So it's a creative division. So the studio is renamed with his name. The studio also becomes an advertising agency. So advertising with its own built-in design division. It's a common thing in the 60s. It's, you can make a lot more money if you do advertising accounts as well as the servicing of it. So they become a huge company. He is essentially getting profits from the advertising side, and he has a very strong creative team. That's why they do it. So SH&L. So by 1959, it's the top of the ladder, probably today. So he's a creative director, and he's got share of profits from advertising. You don't get much higher than that, right? So it's this you succeed, you achieve the peak, and he, to me, does the most opposite, the worst thing you could probably do in that position, which is very strange. But it's very interesting, and there's some logic to it. What happens is he's approached in 1962, this is probably maybe in 1961, by Ralph Ginsberg, the gentleman in these photos by Colonel Kappa, to become the art director of this magazine called Eros. John Pistilli did the beautiful lettering there. This is the worst thing you could probably do as a creative director in 1962. It's a magazine that the intent of this magazine was to be erotic, which is already problematic if you're a very serious creative director in 1960s. 1962 is not the 60s. We're still kind of in the 50s. We haven't started the 60s the way we know the 60s. Number 2, Ralph Ginsberg wanted to challenge censorship. In the United States in the 1950s, censorship was incredibly strict. It's very strange, but it was very, very strict in mail. U.S. Postal Service, because it's a government agency, had control over the mail, and they had censors, actually people whose job was to look through mail. Most of the things that they were looking for was obscenity. Right, this very loose definition. That's exactly the word they used, obscenity. So what is obscene? Not pornography, mind you, obscenity. The people that wanted to send obscene materials through the mail knew well enough not to. So they avoided that altogether. They're smart. They know how this works. So what the government was finding were books. Books that had graphic description of sex. So Henry Miller, Tropic of Cancer, one of the most important novels, was on a big list of books that were banned. You could not send it through the mail in late 50s. It's very strange, very bizarre. So what happened is the Supreme Court finally defined what obscenity is, so that people could have an idea, the censors would have an idea what actually, it's through court cases, appeals, etc. One of the things that they put down with the set of rules of what obscene is a kind of, it became a loophole, but they said art is not obscene, right? Which to them is probably the framework of, if you have a catalog of Renaissance paintings, and there's a lot of nudity in the Renaissance paintings. So if that, as a book, it's being sent through the mail, it's a provision for the government to say, no, this is okay. It's very important art. Yes, they're nudes, but so everything is so abstract. They need something, and this is as close as they can get to the definition. So art is not. Very simple. For Ginsberg, who's incredibly direct and very confrontational, he sees that line, art is not obscene, and it's an opening to him. So he says, I'm going to make a magazine. It's going to be erotic in content. It's only going to go through the mail, only, and it's going to be a work of art. That's how we're going to prove that in 1962 we can do this. That's clearly not what they intended. It's a provision, but he just went directly head on, line by line, word by word. Art, obscene, amazing. So he made this magazine, Eros, that was only sent through the mail. That was the intent. You couldn't buy it on a newsstand. You had to subscribe to it. It was very expensive. And he came to LeBaron to ask him if he was going to be the art director, could be the art director for the magazine. It's very famous at the time. In 1962, he was voted art director of the year nationally. So it's one of the highest honors you can get. So it's a big deal. It's insanely risky, right? It's not just toying with obscenity. It's directly challenging obscenity. It's sort of the worst thing you can do, possibly, because this is the federal government. It's not fun games. So LeBaron understood the risk involved, and he said, I'll do the magazine on one condition. One condition was that I get full creative control. Full control. Doesn't really happen in graphic design, rarely. So a client is take all my money, do whatever you want to do with it. It's a fantasy. This is real. He had such a strong position where he said, this is what I want in exchange. And he creates the magazine. It's still bizarre to me that this was even possible. This was a client in the agency, SNH. This is a billing client. It's not a freelance job he does on the side. The staff is involved. This is work done in the studio. How he was able to pull that through, I'm not really sure. Because you're risking your entire reputation. As a designer, as a studio, as an agency, that's a really big sell to try to make. And he does this. He does this for a number of reasons. One, we all crave freedom. He was able to get creative freedom. That's huge. Two, he is in a very uncomfortable position. So he's in advertising, and he doesn't like advertising. It's kind of a strange thing. He was very good at advertising, but he found advertising in general very uncreative. What he saw out there, really bad. He also had a problem with advertising. He said, I don't like advertising because it makes people buy things that they don't need. So you're really good at advertising, but you don't like the idea of advertising. That's hard. But it's a job. You're good at it. You just you quit and become a painter. This is something that and he found advertising very racist, and he found advertising very sexist. There are very, very few designers at any point in time who are very vocal about the sexism in advertising. He's one of the few that I've ever seen, actually, on record, where he was in a conference was challenging an advertising agency to tell them that their advertising was sexist. Try to find that in a history design textbook. It doesn't exist there. Because why would you go against your industry? You just write yourself out of a job. Like, he was, he had a very big problem with it. So this is his way to deal with it. He accepts the risk and he accepts the challenge. And he takes full control. So it's a hardcover. It defies your expectations and it becomes an experience. LeBaron's very, very keen on like creating this notion of the object. As a designer understands, like, you're communicating to someone through an object. The choices you make within the object are what makes the experience possible. And he spends a lot of time thinking about every single detail. And it's really profound. It could seem a little sleepy. The design could maybe seem a little conservative, but it's profound and it's very important to see it in person. It's a little harder to see it in slides. This is a little dark because the images are also pretty dark. It's a photographic essay by Gary Winogrand that shows up in the first issue. This issue used 4 different paper stocks. 0 advertising. There's no advertising because that's what they wanted. Like, so you can't finance a magazine without advertising. This is the switch in paper. Really beautiful, like, series of photographs with no captions, no text, just a sequence of visual narrative. It's called Love in the Subway. The only place you'll find those photographs. Winogrand is a very, very important American photographer. You will not find that series outside of his work in his exhibitions because the rights probably belong to the magazine. The second issue, the front cover and the back cover, really nice, really beautiful, very subtle use of photography, using the O to frame the couple. Really, really subtle, really very sensitive. And the back cover, on the first issue, the back cover was blank. For the second issue, they ran an image. And it's a different, higher contrast photograph. Same color, duotone, yellow, black, but much darker. So you look at the back cover as it's a different image. So he's making you pay attention, which is, his job as an art director is to make you care about the content. And this is why he's brilliant about it. You open the magazine, on the end papers, because it's hardcover, you have a version, sort of another photograph from the same series. It's really beautiful, like bright red duotone. And the back, at the end of the magazine, you have this blue image. That's blue paper, printed black, really expensive. It's only used for this one spread. The red is used only here for one spread. This is why he asked for creative control. Ginsberg couldn't. This is ungodly expensive, right? There's 5 other paper stocks in the magazine in itself, so you have these 2 things on the outside are probably cost more than the other paper. But that's, I asked for control. Ginsberg couldn't say no, because he also trusted LeBaron. So this is a very kind of LeBaron thing to do. So it's an experience. Right, drilling into the experience of this object. So you have a concept. It's a little corny, a little kind of corny concept, but it's very LeBaron. So you have the front cover, the back cover, and then the end papers. So it's the frame for the magazine. It's a day, one day. So it starts in the morning or daytime, very hot summer day. As you work your way through the content, it's dusk. And it's evening. And so same photos, but manipulation of the experience of the presentation in a very subtle kind of subconscious almost way. You read the magazine very slowly, and the time passes. So he's alluding to this experience. It's pretty, yes, it's corny, but it's really kind of brilliant and very lovely. It's like very, very gentle and very expensive. The first article in this magazine, the second issue, which is another reason why a designer should not touch this, is the intent of Ginsberg. So we all love Jack, that's Kennedy, of course, and this is the text of the article. That's it. This is the entire article. And it says, and it's a little hard to see, but it says, doesn't hide his sex appeal. Right? In 1962, Kennedy, and those 2 words, not something you want to put out there. This has a circulation of about 30,000. So it's not small, it's big. 30,000 people, 35 maybe thousand people are seeing this. And it's very expensive. It's about, counting for inflation, about $100 to subscribe. So there's an elite audience that's buying this and seeing this, and a lot of them are reading this. This is very scary to do this. But they wanted to talk about Kennedy as being new, kind of young, handsome person. He's the president. He's very powerful, of course, but he's different. He's not Eisenhower. They want to tell that story. So this is the text, and to make him come off the clouds, to make him a real person. That's because that's how you can talk about someone having sex appeal. Is you have to be human. To make him human, you sort of like bring him down. Jack, very few people would ever call Kennedy Jack. It's like his family might. Like a publication, this is a really kind of bad thing to do. It's a friend. The Kennedy is not your friend. He's JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Jack is a very familiar kind of way. They could have put John, same 4 letters, same stack. No, Jack is very intentional, like he's your friend. That's how we can talk about him being. So the entire article is made from photographs. That's it. Text and the photos. The photos are from news agencies. So it's the Wire service. So they just looked for photos of Kennedy. But if you look closely at the photographs, it's mostly Kennedy and women. That's it. That's the entire context. Because for them to tell a story about him having sex appeal, you have to prove. And this is how they prove it. And this is look how women are reacting to him. They're falling over the car. He's a rock star. This is really like the point. Look. It's this very simple gesture. Super scary. Anyone recognize who that is on the left there? It's Grace Kelly. So at this point, she's the Princess of Monaco. So she's visiting the White House, and there was a past relationship between the two of them. It's a little uncomfortable, but that's the moment that the photographer captures. And that's the really interesting thing is like they didn't go digging for dirt. They didn't go like look for paparazzi to like find a really dirty photograph of Kennedy. This is any newspaper in the country had access to this photograph. Some ran, maybe some didn't. But they found this, and this is this story. This is the story they want to tell. That's what happens. And he's kind of in his own world. He's just like doing his thing. He's almost like oblivious to the fact that people see him this way, and that's really, really important. So here he is with like, state representatives. I think that's Khrushchev's wife. What's really interesting about this photograph is that's the full frame. And that's her husband, the prince, and that's Jackie in the corner. So they just selectively cropped it out. It's in color, so you can see her dress. It's this really like deep green dress. The last photo in the sequence is his wife. So she's not present in any photos except the last one. And there's an intent. Right? You turn a page, full frame, full frame. The female is on the left and Kennedy is on the right. He's also kind of facing the same way. So you turn, it's an object in your hands, and you have a page, you take your hands, you lift the page, and it's interactive. Image, two images in your mind creates this narrative. Grace Kelly or his wife, right? That doesn't leave a lot of other options, but they don't say anything. It's like photo, real, news. And if you look at the material, it's off-white. It's like very dark brown. And it's hard to tell from here, but if you look at the image, the halftone that's used to print the photographs is a little coarse. It's a little too large for this kind of stock. It's really nice stock. He wants you to think about newspapers. Like subconsciously, we're conditioned to seeing off-white paper and like large dots as newspapers. It's reality. It's real, and so he wants you to live in a space where you have to accept that this is real, that this is happening, so you get to the heart of what the intent is. He wants you to believe it. And the way to get you to believe it is rely on the triggers, the visual cues. That's why it could seem very conservative in terms of the design, but it's really, really thoughtful. You spend a lot of time thinking about all the choices, and the choices are what really kind of comes forward. Third issue had the last photographs of Marilyn Monroe on the cover, and I think it's a little bit of an unattractive cover. It's just like kind of strange to see this kind of layout. I mean, it's a nice cover, but not amazing, especially when you see the other photos. This is has become a very famous photo shoot. This was 6 weeks before she died, and it's published about 6 weeks after she died. What's really interesting about them is this image and the cover. And the cover is, and it's hard to tell whose choice that was. And Ginsberg, LeBaron, maybe both of them together, probably more LeBaron because he's an art director. He is sort of thinking about it probably intuitively. What's really interesting about this, there's a sequence of photographs. It's a 3-day shoot for Vogue that Bert Stern photographed. But they spent time, 3 days just shooting, and they just enjoyed the time, and so this becomes like a very intimate portrait of Marilyn. So there's a lot of candid photographs that are not shot for Vogue, like these were not shot for Vogue per se, but really beautiful photographs. So there's an intimacy that comes through, and that one of the things they wanted to capture is this idea of Marilyn. And that's, I think, what comes through on the cover. So this sequence makes you aware that you're a viewer, that you're seeing images. It sort of pushes you back. You're not, like in the movie. You become aware, like the 1960s trick of like the actor turning to the audience in the film and talking to you. You become aware that you're in the movie theater, and he's talking to me. Like you're like, I'm in a movie. It's fiction. It's like an awareness that's created. This is an awareness that you're not looking at Marilyn. You're looking at images of Marilyn, multiples, and she's posing in all of them. So you get further and further removed from the person of Marilyn, and this is about the image of Marilyn, which is, I'd say, one of the things that she struggled most with is her relationship to the image of herself. Right? So there's no Marilyn in here, except the little X's on these photographs are all hers. So she's present. She kind of rebuilds herself or re-enters the context by crossing out. So she had an agreement with the photographer. She would go through and X out photos that she didn't want. So they run them. So it's the image of her with her hand, with her sort of censoring or kind of filtering. And then you see an image like this. It's very deep. Like they could have just ignored it and not run it, but they run it and it becomes a much richer story, especially in, this comes out after her death. I mean, obviously, like she had just died. This magazine is very sensitive, like this issue, obviously this topic is very sensitive. But this one image tells you everything. It's like her and her relationship to her image, and her constant sort of almost subconsciously tipping and doing this sort of version of her image, the way that she is known. And her reaction is, I don't want to do this anymore. Perhaps. I don't want to be seen like this, so she crosses this out. So it's this really interesting dynamic. The fourth issue was, the big story here was about the Bible. Scary. Ginsberg is sort of counterattacking, so the religious groups are trying to shut this down, like big time. So he just wants to point out how hypocritical it is. He's like, it's in the Bible. All the things you say we're not allowed to do, it's in the Bible. So let's look in the Bible and let's find these things. So that was a problematic story about the Bible. Those, you don't really go after the Bible. And this became a very, very important story for this magazine, although unofficially. But it's a photographic essay called Black and White in Color. It shows a man and a woman, a white woman and a black man. So there's a bit of nudity, which by this point, I mean, that's a problem, but not as big of a problem as the race. In 1962, you couldn't do this. Or you could, but it was not a good idea. Very much not a good idea. The United States is still very segregated at this time, and the idea of relationships between black and whites sexually is a very taboo and off limits. Like, it's almost sort of illegal. Like, you shouldn't mix the races. So this is like them crossing the divide and then really going through in a way that I think they didn't account for how seriously this would get treated. Really beautiful photographs, you know, just kind of plays up it's images, you know, and they found these images really beautiful and they just ran with them. I don't think they were fully conscious of what this might mean for them. I mean, they had to a little bit, but not really fully. If you know Spike Lee's Jungle Fever, the poster for that is a remake of that photograph. Spike Lee knows a lot about design history, more than designers, and he very intentionally used a reference to that photograph in the poster for. He's used Saul Bass, like he knows the very important cultural touch points. So what happens? This person steps in. This is Robert Kennedy. Robert Kennedy is the General Attorney of the United States. So, two brothers. One is the president, the other is the Attorney General. So you have the full control of the United States. They can do anything they want between the judicial department and the executive branch. They can do everything. So this pisses off a lot of people, pisses off Kennedys, and they fight back, or they fought back. So they're having a Christmas party, working on the next issue, the Eros magazine Christmas party. There's a messenger comes in and gives Ginsberg an envelope. He's legally serving him legal papers. The legal papers were an indictment. So Ginsberg was indicted by the American federal government on 20 criminal counts for this magazine. So they found a big bunch of things that they could slap him with, and they slapped him pretty heavily. All written, basically the court case was written by Robert Kennedy. Payback, big payback. You don't just do the article about John Kennedy and think nothing's gonna happen. This is what happens. He's tried in Philadelphia in the summer of '63, and he gets a 5-year sentence for this magazine. So he's given 5 years in prison. Ginsberg is. LeBaron's never mentioned. His fight back is another magazine. He creates Fact magazine, and LeBaron is designing this for free, fully free. And he does something really, really brilliant, and he understands like the relationship of message and content. Design takes a back seat, but it's all about design. You know, it's about this message. So he creates a logo, and he adds the colon, the 2 dots in the word, because it constructs a statement. Fact, blank. It's also a very simple design formula. You can design all the covers the same way. Text on the front, it's very easy to typeset because there's no money. You know, it's a very small budget. But it's really brilliant because it gives the perfect framework. So you see, like, the kind of things that they were going after, the Johnson administration, Reader's Digest, like, it's very hard-hitting, you know, but you read the name of the magazine with the headline. Very few magazines could accomplish that. It's a very brilliant idea. Again, it doesn't really matter which font this is or how it looks, but this concept of fact, and you remember the word, and you kind of internalize that it's a very important word. This guy just sent him to prison. Right? You can fill in any 4-letter word, not a good word, for publishing. So Ginsberg is out of prison. He's not. He's appealing. It takes a while. So he's actually not going to go to prison until 1972. Between 63 and 72, he's fighting back. This is his fight back. This is insane. You just were sent to prison for publishing by that person. Okay. Coca-Cola. Not so good. LeBaron also worked for Coca-Cola that year. This is a huge story. And this is where it's the very remarkable magazine. This is Ralph Nader, the beginning of Ralph Nader's career. This is a big story. American cars were terrible. This person found that to be problematic and wanted to make light of that. So this story gets picked up. There's a book that comes out in 1966, Unsafe at Any Speed. It causes such a huge problem that the government, that's Nader testifying in Congress, because the government, because the book is doing so well, everyone is reading this book, the government is like, oh, cars are unsafe? What do you mean? So they want to find out, they find out how terrible things are. And the US government institutes for the first time safety standards. So this little magazine causes a huge change in American society by affecting safety. I mean, this is crazy. It had a big circulation. I think over 100,000 copies were sent. So, police brutality, and then they do this one. This is 1964 election. So this was a bad issue. This guy sued, he won, closed down the magazine, and LeBaron just moved on to another magazine, Devon Guard. So he could not stop. He didn't want to stop. And he stopped when he went to prison. And he made this magazine, was the third collaboration with LeBaron. It has amazing cultural content. We forget how design hides content, culture. This is in the first issue. It's an article called Drawings by Muhammad Ali. Very few people know that Ali actually drew anything. Very few people actually have seen these drawings. They're buried, well, not really buried, but they're in the first issue. So you will not find this outside of this magazine. These drawings don't exist anywhere, and they probably are lost. So buy the first issue of Devon Guard, you will find an insane part of culture. And they're really, really important drawings. They're not just light. It talks about the problems for, in the religion what religion has done to the black community. And he's a Muslim by this point, so he talks about his relationship to Islam. Insane culture, just in this magazine. This is on the back of the first issue. Another kind of attempt at rattling the cages. This is during the Vietnam War, so it's a huge, huge, huge thing. No fear. Ginsberg goes to prison, writes a book that LeBaron designs for him. It's a very interesting story. So the sad part about this is, or maybe it's the good part about it, you can buy any of those magazines for almost nothing. So you can buy every issue of Eros magazine. There's only 4. They right now sell for about $6. $6, not 60, not 600, 6 or 10, 15, maybe 20. You can buy a full set of 4 for about between $40 and $75 on eBay. That's a screenshot of a search. That's how many are on eBay. Those are all the Harris magazines. So it's not like one in a blue moon. That's many. So it's worth investing. And we can have nice things. In 1977, there's a tobacco company that made cigarettes called Fact, and they basically took the concept of the Fact magazine and turned it into cigarettes. Amazing, right? So I'm fortunate to work in the archive, as Roberto mentioned. We have access to all the things. We created a project called Flower File to kind of dig into some of the stories that kind of are hidden within some of these objects. So there's a story on Fact magazine there. There's a story about a print magazine cover that he did. So I'm trying to kind of delve into that space a bit more. Some takeaways from the things I've learned from LeBaron. Typography is form as well as language. And the distinction to me is very important, and it's important to have those two. the designers craft an experience. Everything we do is creating an experience, and we have to be conscious of that. Like Eros magazine is a full experience. It's not just a magazine. He's very conscious of the relationship you have to paper. It's all important. Designers, we are responsible for shaping and defining visual culture. 10 years from now, people will look back and will see our work, and they'll understand visual culture through the things we've done. So we have a huge responsibility. It's not to, it's scary, but it's important. We have huge influence. And designers have a choice. LeBaron didn't need to do any of that work. His work becomes famous after those 3 magazines. Everything very famous of LeBaron is after. So he made a choice that seems completely counter to what you should have done at that point, and he's a better designer for it. It doesn't hurt his career. He made a choice because he wanted to move away from advertising. He didn't like the space he was in, and he made a very risky choice. He didn't need to do any of those. Far from it. It was actually, you shouldn't do it. Right? It's not just like I could, I don't have to. It's like, no, don't do it. Don't do it. He goes and does it, and it's a choice. Those magazines changed culture. They changed history. The Goldwater magazine issue was very important now. It's being talked about in the context of Trump. So it's actually like that magazine and that cover was still kind of reverberates, and we have a voice. I think it's very important to be able to exercise that. And I think LeBaron proves time and time again that this is something very, very crucial. It's very important. So to me, he's a very important pioneer for those. So thank you.